this facility.
Right.
I think there's a camaraderie between access cable television and what Street News is trying to do. I think there's a natural alliance.
I concur. It's a big interrelationship.
Yeah, and you got some good people I know over there.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Indio. And Indio is the editor-in-chief of Street News, and it's a newspaper that's seen in New York City, and it has a really important role to play. It seems to us we want to talk about it, but in the outset, Indio, welcome very much to Conversation.
Thank you so much, Howard. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure and honor to talk to you. I've looked at the newspaper and press, but I'm wondering, we're going to want to talk about Street News, and maybe we could just the current edition. You could just get a little shot of that on the camera. This is the way this is the current edition, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
The way it looks, and I might just say right at the outset, this is a jam-packed full journal that gives a great deal of thoughtful commentary and so forth. It's a very important format that they have, and we want to talk about that in the phenomena of Street News and that sort of thing. But I wonder, maybe you could, Indio, for us. I know Sam Chen, who is the publisher of it, is there as a colleague of yours, but I wonder maybe you could share your own background, how you became to be involved with Street News, and then weave in some of your own background, and then maybe we could talk about the newspaper and some of the issues you deal with.
Okay, it started back in 1989 when I was homeless. And I was homeless at the time. I was riding on the number 3 train, and there was a young lady selling Street News.
Yeah.
So I interrupted her and asked her if I could assist her selling the paper, and she could give me whatever she wanted. And she said, "Don't worry, brother, I'll take you with me. Come with me." And she brought me down to 44th Street where the office was located, and they gave me 5 free papers. At that time, Street News was selling for 50 cents.
Right,
so they were giving out 5 free papers.
Uh-huh.
I went out, sold the paper at 50 cents a piece, but instead of getting 50 cents a piece, I was getting like $1 and $2.
People gave you a little extra,
Yes,
right? Yeah,
yes.
right. Yeah.
So I went back and I purchased more. And it was the first time I was able to make enough money to stay in a hotel.
Uh-huh.
It was the first time I had enough money to buy food and have cigarettes, and I was able to have money in my pocket.
Yeah.
So at that time, Street News was the first active homeless paper, and it was selling something like 300,000 copies every 2 weeks.
That's a lot.
It was a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And we had over 400 vendors at the time, and things were going very well. And
you said this was 1989?
Yes, sir. It first came out in November.
Okay.
But Hutchison Persons was the one that founded the paper, and he had came to New York because he wanted to be a big rock and roll singer.
Yeah.
And what happened was he wasn't making it with his music.
Yeah,
so
hard,
he was going around to different soup kitchens, and he saw all the negative degradation that was going around, and he thought on how he could assist the homeless.
Right.
And either he came up with the idea or a homeless person said, "Give us jobs."
Yeah.
And so he came around trying to get a newspaper out.
So
and
before that, there had not been a paper with the concept of Street News for the homeless people? Or
not
before
for
that?
about 30 or 35 years ago, they had a paper that was active, but it was all underground.
Yeah, they used to have the East Village Other and all those kind of newspapers part of that movement in the 60s. But I wonder if there was anything like that developed.
Sir.
Did anything like that develop back in the Great Depression of the 1930s?
Well,
when things
there
were
was
really
supposed to have been, but I don't have the exact data.
Yeah.
But it would be in the archives at the public library on microfiche.
Yeah, right.
And so to bring you back up to date.
Okay.
Hutchison Persons went around to different banks, Ben & Jerry's, and many prominent people to see if they wanted to put on a show.
Yes.
His idea was to have a Woodstock on Broadway, and people were jumping on the bandwagon, and they were giving him money like crazy.
Yeah.
And about 2 months before the show was going to be put on Broadway,
right.
It was going to be a Woodstock on Broadway.
You mean like a festival?
Yes.
Right in the middle of Times Square?
Exactly. That was his dream.
Tie things up for real.
Well, exactly. And everything was going great until about the last month when a other difficulties came in, like funds to pay the sanitation department to clean up, and funds to pay the police for policing the area. So it was an overhead, and it was a no-go. Instead of him giving the money back, he started making newsletters, giving to the people who had donated funds. And instead of giving the money back to all the people who had donated this money for
the concert,
Woodstock in Manhattan, he came out with street news. And lo and behold, it was tremendous. Now, it was going well. I mean, you had a lot of homeless people doing something that was real. No panhandle. And it was a good product. The paper was about 16 to 17 pages. And it dealt with interviews of Tony Bennett, Joe Torres, well-known celebrities. And it was going
Did it keep on the theme of homelessness or social concern or something, or was it
dealt
just
a little dealing with the homelessness problems, but the main crutch of the paper dealt with famous people, and the concept was to get these famous people to give their life stories on how they came up and what they went through, and for homeless people to just be vendors and to sell. And they started getting a few vendors to write articles in the paper. But in the beginning, it was highlighted on famous people. Now, everything was going great until around December.
Are you talking still 89 now still?
89, yes.
All right,
A person by the name of Chris Wallace, who's still alive and still has a prominent TV show on the major networks, interviewed Hutchison persons. Everybody thought it was going to be a great deal. And during the interview, he came up with allegations towards Hutchison persons that he had been absconding funds from the vendors. Instead of Hutchison defending, he got up and started pulling the plugs out of the TVs and the lights and walked off. Walked off the program. Everybody who were contributing and were major benefactors to Street News jumped off the bandwagon. They assumed the allegations was true, that he was absconding funds. And that became the fall of Street News. The Internal Revenue and District
Attorney, how did that sort itself out?
They investigated, and the allegations were not founded.
All right, so the fellow was upset with the fact the guy was putting those questions to him, and rightfully so, in a certain sense. He could be. That was a rightful reaction, or an understandable reaction.
I think so. I would have defended, but he didn't. And when he came back to headquarters, he became very autocratic and derogatory. So up until January of 1990, things were like going up and down, but the negative part of the Chris Wallace show made sales go down. And plus the behavior of Hutchison persons towards the vendors and staff became at a very low esteem. So many people...
But it kept publishing?
Kept publishing.
Yeah, but it was tough, right?
Well, it was tough, and many of the staff and vendors were disappointed with Hutchison per se. So Eric Berman, who was one of the editors, decided to start another homeless paper, and it was called Crossroads Magazine. His father was a lawyer. His father put up the money. So a few vendors and staff joined Crossroads
that had been with Street News.
Right. So they all of a sudden the competition against Street News was Crossroads Magazine. The thing was, it didn't do well. Why? There were too many people trying to highlight. They wanted to be in the public, and they were not getting to the nitty-gritty.
The nitty-gritty, the social, political realities
and selling, and
I see, in the
getting
business
down
sense,
to business. Everybody just wanted to be a showboat.
Publishing is tough. It's a tough business no matter what you're doing, whether you're Time Life or
I concur.
Street News.
So what happened was, after about a year, Eric decided to do away with the paper, go back to Columbia.
To the Crosswalks, or the Crossroads.
Crossroads Magazine. Do away with it because his father was losing money.
And who was responsible for Street News at that time?
Still, it was in the hands of Hutchison Persons.
And had that jury investigation or auditing thing come out yet to where he'd been vindicated?
It was
still hanging there, right? Yeah.
It was unfounded.
Rumors can really do damage.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
I concur.
Yeah.
But what happened was his attitude had changed towards the workers, and he kept trying to keep the paper going. But because of financial problems and the attitude between the workers and the vendors and himself, it didn't stay as high.
Yeah.
So at that time, Hutchison Persons sold the paper to Sam Chin.
At that time, 1990, something like that?
Around 91, I would
91,
say.
okay, right.
Now, Eric decided to go back to Columbia University to get his degree in journalism. So he closed the paper down. I went back to Street News as a Guy Friday volunteer.
Right, all right.
Now,
Just as Sam Chin was taking over? Or?
Sam Chin was in charge. Sam Chin had an editor-in-chief, and he had editors and reporters, and he was paying all of this money out. But the paper was not selling. It was going down.
Why?
Basically because two things. There was a lot of theft going on.
Theft? Theft of the papers, you mean,
Yes.
at the street level? Or yeah.
No, theft within the administration. People who are on staff were not doing their job.
All right, well, this could be a problem, yeah.
No
right.
question. And
Sam's a very savvy businessman.
Sam
He's
is
got a
very
heart of gold,
savvy.
but he's a very savvy businessman.
I concur, sir.
Yeah.
The thing is, the people that he had hired to be the editor were not taking care of business.
Okay, well.
All right? And so he finally saw this, and he decided to do away with the paper.
The paper, not just the
Street
staff.
News itself.
And
He
did it
was
go out
gonna
of,
close it.
did it close down?
Well, here we're going to get to the nitty. At that time, Janet Wickenhaver was the editor-in-chief, and her husband is the owner of the West Side Spirit. It's a free paper.
Oh, okay, right.
And Janet was noted for her big article for the Wild Man on 96th Street.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
she was famous for that.
Yeah.
So when Sam decided to do away with the paper per se, Janet jumped up, left, and joined the
West Spirit.
No, she joined the New York Times.
Okay, right.
So we had
pretty good.
Lee Stringer, who wrote the book Grand Central Terminal, became the co-editor-in-chief, and John Hart. They became the co-editor-in-chief of Street
And the
News.
editor sets the tone for the kind of reporting and the kind of articles that are going to be in there, and
The
has a
editor-in-chief
responsibility for that?
does.
Yeah.
And when the reporters and senior editors write stories, it's his job to make sure it's okay.
It's your job now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the tone of those articles, from doing celebrity interviews to reporting on social, political nitty-gritty, as you say, that's a change, and it would make a difference between the success or or the lack of success on the part of the paper in terms of the market accepting what's being offered, no?
Yes and no.
Or no, okay.
It's a yin-yang.
All right.
I'm going to get there.
Everything is, I guess.
So John Hart and Lee Stringer became the editors-in-chief. I was Guy Friday.
How many of you were there then?
At that time,
At this
it
to
was
be-
about 5.
5.
It
This
was
is,
only
say,
5 of us.
early 90s when it's getting started under
Right.
Sam's ownership.
No, this is about 2 or 3 years
Into
under
that.
Sam's
All right.
ownership, where the paper was not doing well. He had maybe 3 or 4 different editor-in-chiefs, which he had paid.
And what kind of reporting were they doing in that
They
early,
were doing
in the early
basically
90s? Was it
the,
social criticism,
It
or what
was
was
social and a little intermixed, but it was basically dealing with major stars and
it?
famous.
Still doing that celebrity thing? yeah.
Sure.
Well,
And-
celebrity does have, like People Magazine has a,
Well,
yeah.
I beg to differ, and
All
I'll
right,
show you
all right,
the
all right.
integration. So what happened was Sam was going to do away with the paper again. As I came on, and people were jumping off, there was 3 people, Lee Stringer, myself, and John Hart, decided to ask Sam to let us do the paper, and we would pay for everything ourselves. Instead of Sam giving out salaries, we would pay for the production, and we would pay all expenses.
How would you make your living that way? If you
selling the paper.
By selling the paper. Entrepreneurially, then, in a sense, right?
Yes.
You wanted to take an entrepreneurial chance on it. Yeah,
exactly.
all right.
So he agreed.
All right.
Now, we were...
And did you have a different editorial vision in mind, do you think?
Well...
From what it had been to what it ought to become, or has become?
Well, at that time, it was under auspices of Lee Stringer and John Hart. I'm the low man on the totem pole.
Of three?
Of three.
All right.
John Hart decides to leave, and he joined the Spirit. Lee Stringer makes me the managing editor.
All right, yeah.
And so I was able to write some stories and make some suggestions.
Yeah, we hadn't gotten into that before in 1989 when you said you first became acquainted with you were homeless and so forth. But had you been a writer in your earlier incarnations and so forth?
Yes.
You had writing.
I had writing
It's a tough
skills
game, but yeah.
Because I was the ghostwriter for Duke Baldwin of the Amsterdam News, who had a column, and he still has a column in the Amsterdam News called The World of Dining.
Yeah.
But he also used to put on a lot of talent shows, and I was his talent coordinator.
All right, yeah.
So that was one interrelationship.
And you're from New York, right?
Born and raised.
You're a New Yorker in
Harlem,
Harlem, right?
New
So you
York.
got a lot of street smarts. It's a good thing to have some street smarts experience.
Well, I have a PhD in streetology.
All right, streetology.
That's no question.
Yeah, right,
I have other degrees. I have a master's from Fordham. I have a doctorate in theology.
In theology?
Guilty.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
You have a doctorate in theology
minister.
from where? Where'd you take that?
Unity Universal.
Yeah, huh? Oh, I see. Yeah,
I'm also a minister.
Yeah, huh? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's get back.
Yeah, back to 93 or so, and
93,
Hart's leaving,
94.
and you're just about the managing editor.
Right.
And yeah.
So
and the editorial policy is changing in some sort?
It was changing in the sense that we were bringing more political actions and stories, even though it was socially and politically, but not as hard. Not as hard.
As it has become.
Right.
All right.
So what happened was Lee Stringer, at that time, had a problem with drugs. And he went to a rehab to get himself straight. And I became the editor-in-chief in 1996.
Have you been that since?
Guilty.
All right, that's good. So that gave you a hand to be able to set an editorial policy?
Yes.
And it changed then from to what it is, it began the process to end up what it's become now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I would say to you, in a certain sense, congratulations,
well,
because you have a very rich editorial content to this newspaper. It's amazing how much you put in there and how much of it is so very well written and to the point of social criticism that is deserved and needed in the society.
I thank you, but I have to give credit to Sam Chin and the Street News family, which is the whole team of the writers and the vendors.
One of which is our Frank Craven, who does a program here. He writes a regular column on there.
Exceptional good job.
Yeah, and you've got people covering mental health. You've got all kinds of things being covered.
This is what I want to show you now.
Yeah.
The paper originally in 1989 consists of maybe 18 or 19 pages.
Right.
And it stayed that way until I took over.
That was 96, did you say?
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah.
So we increased the paper.
Yeah.
And we increased it up to 60 pages.
I see. You're
at
up
one
to 60,
time.
Yeah,
right
you're
now
55,
we have
now
56.
Right, right.
But the largest amount of pages we've ever had was 60 pages.
I'm going to thumb through this, can I?
Okay, but I want to, while you're thumbing through, I want to give the sermon on the commode of Street News.
Maybe they could just look at this
and what's going on is...
It's 56, if I may, just really quickly,
yes,
56 pages of text. I mean, these is real. This is not, you know what I'm trying to say, and it goes like this for 66
Yeah, we don't
pages
have too much
of
advertising.
Serious talk. No.
Not too much advertisement. Why? Because we deal with the good, the bad, and the filthy McNasty, especially dealing with your mayor, dealing with the police brutality, racial profiling. We also deal with the Gap, Disney, Van Houston shirts, Michael Jordan, Kathy Lee, and slave labor, sweatshops.
Yeah.
We have the whole
Work with the
configuration.
National Labor Committee.
Yes,
Labor
sir.
Committee.
We deal
Turn
with
again
the
to those
real
people?
deal.
They're really
The
good,
real
yeah.
deal we
Yeah.
deal with. Now, what happens is big companies and corporations who are aware of us telling the real deal.
The real deal from a particular perspective, right?
We do not deal with Fantasy Island.
Yeah.
Everything in our paper is fact, Jack.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's the real deal.
Yeah, and you have fact checkers and facts.
No question.
Fact
No question.
checkers and so
Yeah,
forth.
and we have people that shepherdize, and we have researchers. The most important thing, we also have the vendors, and we have
how
people
does that
from
work?
the streets.
How does it work? I mean, what's the publication? What's the circulation? How often is it published, and what's the deal on that?
Now, here's the bad part.
Okay.
We have 60 vendors now, from
60
400 down to 60.
All right.
Now, 50 of our vendors are no longer homeless.
Mm-hmm.
They're either working, or they're in the welfare system, or on workfare.
Now, the vendors had been homeless people?
Yes.
That was a policy?
Such as myself.
You were
Yes.
homeless at the time.
Guilty.
Through all kinds of things. And then you would take the papers, you get them on consignment, you would go out and sell the
No,
papers?
sir. You get the first. Originally, you would get 5 papers free. No
Yeah.
more consignment after that.
Yeah.
You'd have to buy it per se.
Uh-huh. You'd buy them up front.
Yes, sir.
Pay the money up front, and then go out and sell them for more than what you paid them for.
Exactly.
And then some people would also give you more.
Exactly.
And you see them on the
tips.
subways and people around.
Right. We've had a lot of famous people buy a paper and give a $50 tip or
Yeah,
a $100 tip.
Yeah, and that's a
things
way
of
to
that
get it
sort.
back to the through the individual. But the individual is almost entrepreneurial in a sense.
It is. That's the point I'm trying
Yeah.
to get at. It builds self-esteem.
Okay, well,
Now,
okay, yeah.
Let me deal with the vendors. Out of 60 vendors,
Yeah,
we have 50 that are no longer homeless.
all right.
Okay, so they have a place to stay and food. They have 3 hots and a cot.
Yeah,
so to
right.
speak.
And they maybe got themselves out of that by getting
Right.
that route, right?
Right.
Well, that was hopefully the outcome of what that
goal.
process would
That was
result
the
in.
primarily goal.
Yeah. So what
Now-
happens if they get to where they're not in that thing? Do they have to give up the distributionship or
no,
what?
sir. No,
Okay.
sir. This is for homeless, formerly homeless, or people who do not want to go into that modality.
Well, that could be almost anybody. Because there's an
Exactly.
awful lot of people who are only a couple paychecks away from being homeless, which is a little disquieting for a lot of people, but it is nonetheless true in the system the way we got it set up now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I concur.
People should do well to be realizing
Oh,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
But the point is,
Yeah.
the other 10, we have 10 homeless people
Yeah.
that sell the paper on a continuous basis every day, like I used to do when I was homeless. And I used to average $100 a day all the way up to $200
$100 a day doing what? Going and selling the paper on
Selling
the
the
street to
paper,
people. How would you get 100? How much do you have to pay to get the papers that you sold that would fetch $100 or $200?
At the time when I was selling the paper, it was for 50 cents.
Yeah.
So I would pay maybe 10 or 15 cents.
Uh-huh.
And people would always give tips. They wouldn't just give you 50 cents.
The paper was selling for 50 cents.
Yes,
You were
sir.
paying 10 or 15 cents
Yes,
per
sir.
paper?
Yes, sir.
So they sold it for you under what the cost?
All the time,
Yeah, right.
which
I
we
see.
do now.
And at about 1/3 then? Is that a fourth
yeah,
or a third
that's
of the
pretty
actual
good.
cost, right?
I can give it
So
to
now
you
it
now.
sells, if I may, in 2001 it sells for how much? If you
It
what is
sells
it?
for $1.60.
$1.60.
Now,
A lot
let
of
me-
people would probably pay $2 or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
And
I
how much
give
does
out,
the person who's vending it buy it for?
he buys it for 60 cents
60 cents. All right, so he's got $1
commission
commission if it's sold at the list
at
price.
the dollar. Now,
Yeah.
this is the difference. We have 56 pages, which means we don't pimp anybody. You get your money's worth.
You
we
sure
have,
do. I mean, you could I spend the whole day Sunday reading the New York Times. You could read the whole week reading Street News.
Exactly.
And it's good.
Thank
it's
you.
all good print. It's good copy.
We have, I think, I can't prove this, more articles than the major papers
Yeah.
because we have less advertisement.
Yeah.
All right. So there's real stories in there.
They are indeed, yeah.
And
well written. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
And we make people aware of police brutality.
All right.
There's an article, Stolen Lives, that lists people who has been murdered by the police, not just yesterday, but we go back. And I've had the privilege of printing that for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, right.
We also have a former judge, Bruce Wright.
Bruce Wright, yeah,
known
sure.
as
Black
Cut 'em Loose.
Justice, white robes, or
Right.
what is it? White
Exactly.
Justice, black robe.
And
what is it?
Black Robe in a White World
Great
and Black
books.
Robes. Well, he gave me permission to
Yeah.
put excerpts in there.
Good, okay.
He was known as Cut 'em Loose
Cut 'em
Bruce.
Loose Bruce,
He's
yeah.
the most famous writer that
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
in the paper. Compared to the vendors who also have their own columns.
Mhm.
And we have a section called Street News Family that deals with the configuration of the vendors, the writers, and people off the streets
Yeah.
to give their opinion on the mayor, police brutality, the president, the vice president, the senator,
Yeah.
to give their own dissertation on what they believe is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And we print that.
Uh-huh.
And it talks about the real deal.
So you have like if you have the New York Times, you have news reporting, right?
Yes, sir.
You have that, and then you also have op-ed. You have op-ed pieces.
Yes, sir.
You have a lot of op-ed columns in there, columnists that are
Right.
regulars and everything.
Yeah.
But what about on the news side? Do you try and do news reporting, or is it all opinion kind of reporting? and
news
so forth? How do you, as editor-in-chief, deal with that journalistic?
The news
equation?
reporting comes from the street.
Mm-hmm.
What I read in the paper and what I get off the blue tube
Mm-hmm.
is not good enough. I try to go to the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
If I can't go to the horse's mouth,
Try to get to the folks.
no question.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I can't get to the main person or persons that's involving in the story,
yeah.
then I want to get an opinionated opinion from individuals.
Who-
If I give my opinion, it's one-sided. And if you read the papers, it's generally one-sided.
You mean the papers other than Street News?
Yes,
or
sir.
all
The
papers?
main
Well, if you read,
media
yeah,
papers.
if you read the Post, Mr. Murdoch's paper, you get a very different take than you do if you read the New York Times.
Oh,
Or then they have the Observer,
right.
and then they have the mainline papers, and you got the Wall Street Journal. You get a different take and everything.
Right.
And then another newspaper that's available to the people of New York City, in this case, Street News, which has another perspective, which in some people's mind might be more authentic to the way a lot of the real folks, in a democratic sense, feel and see things, and an avenue for that kind of thinking than the editorial board's opinions of what ought to be in a newspaper by the established media.
That's true. And what we're proud of, we go throughout the whole world.
All right.
All right?
What do you mean you go throughout the whole
We're
world?
the oldest active homeless paper in the world.
All right.
What came first, the chicken or the egg?
I'm
The
not sure.
idea.
All right. Okay.
So
Yeah.
we thought of Street News first, and we have imitators throughout the world.
Okay, so this phenomenon of street news, the concept of it, is being done in other cities and
Throughout
places
the
around the
whole
world?
world, sir.
How wide a network is
They
that?
even have it in Russia.
They have it in
They have
Russia?
it now. You have a famous paper called The Big Issue that has homeless papers in Africa.
Uh-huh.
You have it in Ireland. You have it in London. You have it in France.
Now, why, if I may,
Yes, sir.
why is it that they're thought of as homeless people? Because the homeless people are pertinent, as opposed to, let's say, we have we have magazines, we have The Nation, we have politically inclined papers, but they're not for people who are necessarily homeless or talking. You know, it's a different kind of it's just that they're politically critiquing the way the society is set up. But why the homeless as a common denominator of uniting parts of society? It's a lot of the people that are in the most difficult situations within their respective societies would be the homeless. Is that what, in a sense, you're trying to deal with?
No, well,
No.
that's, well, it's
Or the
configuration.
concerns of them?
It's a configuration.
Yeah.
Which are major magazines and papers. They're sold from newsstands.
Yes.
And you could buy it directly from newsstands, but street news is primarily sold by the homeless vendors that
Sent
go
by
around.
the homeless, right? Okay.
It's not sold too much from newsstands.
Could it
per
be
se.
sold from newsstands?
We have five
There are
distributions.
Five distributions in Manhattan.
Newsstands in Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn. We had it in Staten Island and the Bronx.
I mean, there's certain newsstands where you can go and find it.
Right.
All right.
And the point is that was for the purpose of the vendors to go buy from the
So it was like
newsstand.
yeah, right.
It's a distribution point where they
So
can
you have one in
purchase.
Manhattan?
We have 3 in Manhattan.
3 in Manhattan.
We have 1 in Brooklyn, and we have 2 in Queens.
And that's a pattern around the world? Is everybody delivering?
The pattern is the vendors selling it per se. That's the concept. Whereas the Daily News or Vogue is sold at newsstands.
Well, yeah. Now, if you
but it's not sold by the homeless.
Now, what about in the old days? When I was a kid, the first job I had, I guess I don't know, was a newspaper delivery boy. I was in Detroit, so we had
but
the
you
Detroit
were delivering it. You
yeah,
were delivering it, and you were getting a salary.
That's true.
Okay, I used
you
to
get tips at Christmas. I remember you used to get tips or something.
Right.
But you would go and you would throw the newspaper up on their porch, and that's the way a lot of kids got going. And you know, you don't. That's
I got it.
different.
When I was in grammar school, I used to sell the Amsterdam News.
Yeah.
And we would get the paper and knock on the door, just like Fuller Products, and sell the paper and get a commission.
Yeah, all right.
This is the same concept.
I see. You're right. It's a little different.
The point is, when a person is homeless,
yes,
with
all right.
low esteem,
Yeah.
and they have a product to sell,
Yeah.
they're going to talk to people. Now, this is a big fact I'd like to bring out.
Yeah.
In the beginning, we had more females selling the paper than males. So what happened was you had prominent white-collar workers and blue-collar workers that would come up and say, what's a nice girl like you doing selling street news?
Yeah.
And they would give their sermon on the Mount, and the next thing you know, they were giving cards, well, come see me. So these females would come and get jobs faster than the men, or they became mistresses for these prominent men. Some even got married to them. I'm telling you the truth.
Yeah,
sir.
well, that's New York
Now,
City tales. Yeah,
dealing
stories.
with the men who sold the paper, they also were able to talk to prominent business people as well as prominent business women.
Yeah.
And they would also get jobs.
Yeah.
They would get jobs working in factories or back into the mainstream.
Yeah. Do we have an idea of who reads street news or who the readership is? Is there any way of knowing?
The readership primarily deals with upper, lower, all the way up to upper class. Your lower, middle, and lower upper, you don't have too many of those people purchasing the paper.
Yeah. You probably get a lot of people who would get the Observer and the Wall Street Journal would get street news.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The centerpiece deals with something to take a look at, and the people that write for us, they're very literate. Very literate.
Except in the case of that, say the Observer or the Wall Street Journal, you got people who would be generally on the political spectrum would be Republican in their own thinking and so forth. So I'm not sure. Maybe a lot of the New York Times people would read it too.
Sure.
Upper West Side liberals and that would read it because you have a slant to the way you report things, and that is socially critiquing, let's say, maybe exponents of the free market, although you're doing a free market thing here yourself. I'm just saying it's a very interesting kind of dynamic or
unfortunately,
demographic.
The major papers and advertising copy our style. They copy our style, but they won't give credit to it. But they look at our paper.
Do you not have advertising as a matter of policy, or because not that many people want to advertise, or it's not a good dollar for them, or you haven't ever worked that out? And if you could, would you start filling it up and make it 300 pages and put some ads in for Macy's?
I'm always open for advertising. However, if it's not a good advertisement, we won't.
Socially
put
conscious,
it in.
you mean?
Well, no. Van Houston shirts. Let's use Van Houston.
Yeah, I think it's Van Houston.
Okay, tomato.
All right,
Let's put it. All right. But the owner was on Oprah, and she came out with the question about blacks and minorities purchasing the shirt, and he came right out and said, if I knew they were going to buy this here, I wouldn't have it because it's really geared for white people. And she asked him to leave. If they asked for an ad, and I wouldn't do that.
I see.
Disney, I knocked Disney. We knocked the Gap. We knocked Kathy Lee, and all of us, and Michael Jordan, and dealing with this
sweatshops overseas.
Exactly, and they all took the fifth and said, "Oh, I didn't know." But Kathy Lee did show an effort to try regroup and make it look good.
Yeah.
So we're bad news bears. And then I have other allies that send me information on who's not doing what they're supposed to be.
You mean in the broader world?
The broader world, and especially the mecca of the world, which is New York City.
All right,
and I'm talking about the mayor.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the commissioner.
Right.
I'm talking...
And there's a lot of bad things going on in the name of policy, right?
And there's a lot of good things.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot of good things.
Do you want to try and do that? You want to try and kind of an even balance, or are you trying to paint things black as Mr.
It's one-sided. I believe in the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
In the beginning, there was good, and love was up here. And somewhere down the line, hate is in charge.
It's in the saddle.
It's all the way. My goal is to even it up with the law of diminishing returns, and one day love will be back in the saddle.
So do you have an overall political philosophy, if you were to, or an economic philosophy?
Yes, sir.
If you were to look at one of the Wall Street Journal, it would probably be somebody like Van Hayek or Schumpeter or something would inform the editorial page of the position that they take, and they have a certain kind of theory, you know, that kind of thing. And do you all have one? Do you have a? Do you tend to be? Do you have a liking for a Marxist analysis, or is there
no, sir.
Or is there some?
No, it's a
socialist analysis, or
I would put it
entrepreneurial analysis, or
it's a human analysis. The Wall Street Journal, I respect. I respect the New York Times.
Yeah, great papers.
I respect every paper. However, you're only going to get a selective few that's going to purchase our paper and see where we're coming from.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at. Where are you coming from?
We're
politically,
coming
socially, and economically.
We're coming from a configuration of all three. The main goal
is justice.
The main goal is to stop poverty. We want all of our vendors to have 3 hots in a cot.
Yeah, right. You want all the people in the world to have that, if you could, at a social level.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, right. So you're socially conscious, right?
We're socially conscious, but I'm not into socialism vis-a-vis Marxism, vis-a-vis democracy and capitalism.
You're not? What are you into?
I'm into love.
Into love. All right.
And I'm into common sense.
Common sense love. Loving common sense is probably a pretty good formula.
And I'm also into being realistic.
All right.
You see, there was never on this planet a religious war, sir. It was nothing but greed. There's enough food, clothing, and shelter to feed everyone on this earth.
Every day you watch the news hour, Mr. Lara.
Okay.
And every day they got Archer Daniel Midland, David Brinkley coming on and saying, there's no problem creating enough food. We can create an abundance of food for everybody. There's no problem in terms of being able to create enough for everybody. And in a certain sense, you could take that as a metaphor that's realistic on the whole pattern. On the whole, our ability to produce not only food, clothing, housing, all these kind of things, information, understanding, all these kind of things, we're actually getting to where the ironclad laws of scarcity are perhaps being transcended in terms of our collective capability. We don't have a way of, and yet we have people all over the world suffering indignities, sweatshop conditions, slavery, near onto slavery and so forth. And as Mr. Brinkley says, it's just politics and economics. We don't have a system that lets us do what we're capable of doing, and that's a source of angst and deep frustration for a great number of socially conscious people, and our political leadership doesn't seem to be providing us with vision. Or does that resonate at all to the way you see things?
I concur in certain aspects, but the negative factor is greed. You have pharmaceutical companies that can assist people with AIDS in Africa and other countries. We have enough food, but there's greed. It's like when I was a child. I used to have cheap sneakers, and at that time, back in the early ages, Tom McCann's was the main sneaker.
Tom McCann,
and people would say to me, I used to get my sneakers from Bloomington's, which was $1. My mother would pay $1.
Yeah.
And they'd say, ha ha, you're wearing these messed up sneakers.
Yeah.
Now they call them skips as a pair to Nikes, but that word wasn't around in my day. They just said, oh, you're wearing Bloomington's. And I said, let's run to see who's the fastest.
Yeah.
And every time I ran against people who had Tom McCann's or PF Flyers, I would win.
Yeah.
And I'd say, what happened?
Yeah.
And I'd say, oh, my leg hurts. I said, well, let's trade sneakers. So that's when I was a child. Now
I'm a man.
I'm a man.
Yeah.
And people are still playing the childish game.
Yeah.
I mean, my shoes are better than yours because I got mine from floor shops.
Yeah, right,
Where'd you get yours?
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Greed. I have more money than you.
Status.
I'm better than you because I graduated from Fordham.
Yeah.
You graduated from NYU.
Right.
It's that simple status that does not tilt.
So, and that's not something that sits nicely with Indio.
The best sense and the most literate people use common sense.
Yeah, common
that's
sense
why
and love. Common sense and love.
That's part of it.
Right.
And that's why I said I have a PhD in streetology.
Right, streetology.
I have a Doctor of Divinity in theology. I have a master's in education from Fordham. The main thing is street education and loving one another. But if you don't want to use that word love, because people get a little
it's almost as bad as saying liberal. Liberal became a bad word, an ugly word, and now love is becoming a bad word.
So we'll use another word.
Free market booters.
Another word might be proper concern. How's that?
Yeah.
That sounds a little better than love. We'll use proper concern. But there's enough food, clothing, and shelter for everyone.
Whereas historically, we're 200,000 years on this planet as a species. You know, we've all come out of Africa and everything like that. And for most of that time, we were in a condition of scarcity. James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. And we may be having with this, we got the genome now, we got all this capability. We may be coming into a new era, which is one of frustration. Now, when you're saying that thing of common concern and that, you know, Tom Paine wrote Common Sense and these kind of things, people have these different views of how to deal with it over time, the economic theories, political policies. And they would probably all say we're going in that direction. The free market people will say, well, we're just building in a way that's going to bring this about. And so forth, but that you don't have a fixed star at Street News in terms of that. You just want to use the idea of let's get common sense answers to the problems that we can see, and that is a general thing. So you're not ideologues.
No, that's true.
Okay.
We do have a goal. We have a short-term, middle-term, and long-term goal.
Yeah.
Right now, we are at a monthly status. We put out a paper monthly. We want to go from monthly to bi-monthly to weekly.
And to bi-month, twice a month?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right.
And then weekly. And then guess what?
Daily.
Daily.
Yeah,
so,
daily.
And guess
the street
what?
Daily, the street daily.
And here's the other positive part. I want everyone to own the paper, the vendors and the writers to be stockholders of Street News.
Well, you're on good territory there. There's an idea I could talk to you after the camera called binary economics, which is really the idea that we have to spread ownership because the technology is becoming more and more responsible for production. We have to do that as a general principle that people, other than just labor, have to have a claim upon income which involves their ownership in the thing that they're involved with, or maybe even on into the general economy. That's a big issue that isn't confronted yet by the political leadership, but it will be.
The other issue.
You're right on in that issue. Yeah.
The other issue which people may not take a look at poverty is because many of Americans are stockholders in companies that screw up the environment and are doing negative things. All they look at is the profit sharing.
Yeah, the quarter report.
And the most important thing is when you have stock, they will send you a report of where your stock is invested and the names of the companies.
So you could get some sense of social responsibility behind that.
Now, guess what?
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Okay,
yeah.
I used to
that's
work.
an interesting thing. Yeah.
I used to work for the Board of Education.
Yeah.
As a teacher. So they deduct the money and I get funds. And when I got my report of where these funds are allocated,
your retirement funds,
there's a lot of funds invested in companies that's hurting the environment
Yeah.
and hurting other people.
Yeah.
So I have to take a look at, am I going to keep getting this money? Or am I going to be man enough to say, I don't want this money because you're hurting my brother and sister, or you're hurting the environment?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge question. Yeah.
99 and 3/4 will say, show me the money.
Yeah.
Later for the other things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I have the sick need to not be a part of that.
Yeah,
I don't want to be down with that. But how many Americans will take a look at what I'm throwing out?
Yeah,
and
but
I thank you for letting me bring this out on the show.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, you wanted
I'm
a
quite
little-
in accord with that. You know, that's a huge question that confronts not only the editor of Street News and publisher of Street News, but our national policy decision makers, particularly in a globalizing world. Yeah.
People don't
Huge
bring this
issue.
out. Why
Yeah.
don't they bring this
It's
out?
complex and it's
we, the
complicated.
people, can change all of the ills and the negativity that's going on by taking a look to see where our money is invested.
Well, yeah, and also if we have an overarching kind of a thing of how to judge us, because it's a transition time and things are changing, and it's like history is a nightmare, and there are nightmare kind of scenarios, or we don't have to go through the satanic mills that, you know, that Blake and so forth wrote about necessarily, that there are things that are changing, but we don't have at a leadership level, political or other, or even intellectual, a clear understanding of how we're going to go about arriving at a new way of organizing the system that the future does offer the opportunity and challenge for us to find. We don't have that yet among our it might well merge some of these visions of how that's going to be done might very well first be shown on the pages of the Street News, which would be a very interesting kind of
I'm glad
kind
you
of
mentioned
situation
that.
where you could get some real intellectually cutting edge, socially responsible cutting edge opinion and so forth coming not on the editorial page of the New York Times, which would be caught up in the old way, just say for instance, but on the pages of Street News, particularly as it gets close to becoming an absolutely must-read daily for every decision-maker on the planet.
I hope so.
If you understand what I'm saying.
I do, sir.
Yeah.
The other avenue is to get more people to run for office, such as yourself. This is, or I would like to run for dog catcher. But
dog catcher?
Yes, because I
hope
like
somebody
collecting
takes care
dogs.
of those good dogs.
Exactly.
I love dogs. Yes.
This is the point I'm trying to get at. To knock the system is one thing, which all of us do.
Yeah, and it's easy
But-
sometimes to knock it, but to give an
Exactly.
alternative is tough.
Alternatives and positive solutions.
Practical alternatives.
And no question.
Yeah, that's tough.
So if, the little preposition if, we started
The big preposition is.
getting together
If only
and
that.
taking a look at different avenues. I'm one person, you're one person. But the media, your show and many other programs from this network throws out the real deal.
And the network is, we're running out of time, but the network of, you say these people are around the world.
Yes, sir.
And they got the street news movement, as it were, and so forth. We have public access. There's more public access programming turned out in this nation than there is the rest of the television industry. So you've got these places around where these shows are going on. Public. There are networks of people like that, and we're beginning to get ourselves connected up together through this internet and so forth.
Yes,
so that
it's true.
becomes an important thing. Now, you said, how realistic is it when you said you would like to see it become a bi-monthly, bi-weekly, daily, and what is the realistic possibility of that? And how big can your paper get before you run out of, you talked about economies of scale,
Right.
to where you can only get so much in, and, what's there, is that a realistic thing that you could think of
It's
stepping it up?
realistic.
And how much of the distribution of the paper is through subscription? Could it be sent through the U.S. mail, or
Yes.
what's the realities of all
We
that?
have
Or the
10%.
internet, internet.
We have 10% of subscriptions.
All right.
Then 90%.
Growing or going?
They're going at present.
No, are they growing? Is it
No,
growing?
sir.
the trend?
No,
Okay.
sir.
Okay.
And in a way, I'm glad
okay.
because, again, it's for the vendors to sell, to get their quick dollar. The way it's going now,
That's like a true Keynesian it's demand side. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
supply and demand. If every time we make more money, we put more pages in the paper. That's where the profit goes. And we need more people to buy the paper.
Yeah, all
But
right.
But the main thing is people do not like to read any longer. They like listening and watching the blue tube in the main media, and they're controlled. It's classical condition. I'm going to watch the 8 o'clock news, 9 o'clock news. I'm going to watch this program and that program. I don't have time to really get down and read the paper unless I'm a student and unless I'm a teacher, and it's involvement.
Yeah.
So
what about, okay, I understand, yeah, and you got a competition with all the media, and you got the internet coming.
Exactly.
For crying out loud. They got web pages all over the place, there's all kinds of things
so
you can do.
I need an addendum. So what's the addendum? I'm starting a singing group because I'm a singer and an actor.
You singing, what do you sing, baritone?
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
I used to sing jazz with Art Blakey Jr.
Oh, really?
But I have an a cappella group,
right.
and I'm organizing them now to have a street news crew. Group.
Street news.
Crew. It's going to be called the Street News Crew.
Street
And right
news
now
room
we're
and crew.
singing.
Yeah.
We're singing in Penn Station, Duffy Square, Grand Central Station, and we're making noise. People are beginning to recognize. So if we can get entertainment, people will look, they'll stop, look, and listen, and maybe they can tune into the real deal.
It'd be a good idea to link up. I'll tell you, you go around New York City, there's amazing talent on the streets. I mean, they really are. There's such great stuff.
Right.
I mean, there really are subway stations. Some guys playing like a god, you know, and it's true, that kind of thing.
We have that also.
Or if you could get cutting edge. Like we said before, maybe it's asking too much for a street news. I mean, you're getting a thing put out. You have really good copy. But if you had really, you know, that thing, celebrity. You said before, celebrities, movie stars, pretty faces and stuff. But then there's celebrities, intellectual celebrities, too. Maybe you could get into a lot of them around New York, people that are really... if you got something by somebody who really has some, like we just read this article, was great, New Yorker. I don't know, you couldn't get him, Canaletta. You know, Canaletta writes for the New Yorker, wrote this great piece on Ted Turner. It was great. It was really good. If you had that kind of a thing, then you get the names of somebody like that in there, then that would maybe, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm not that way. You're about the 20th person that made that suggestion.
Yeah.
My celebrity is Joe Splivengate from the streets.
All right, good. Yeah.
They're my celebrity.
You know, Marshall McLuhan, he used to have a thing. It was Robert Oppenheimer used to quote or something like that in physics. They were trying to do the Manhattan Project. He said there are children walking in the streets who could solve our top problems in physics.
That's right.
Because they have modes of perceptions we lost long ago.
Exactly.
Talking about the specialists, there may be people out there that have them, and you want to tap into that, right?
Well,
that would be great. But then if Joe Spliff becomes the guy like that, then all of a sudden he would be in the New Yorker, too.
Maybe.
What I'm saying. If he's got some sort of a...
Maybe.
You know what
Maybe.
But I hear what you're saying, yeah.
We have...
A wide net.
Well, we have a gentleman that used to be with Street News.
Yeah.
He's now in the police force, and he's a detective. But he never comes to say thank you, because I gave the okay when the personnel called me. They never send a letter, because being a homeless person is like having AIDS.
Yeah,
it should
that's
be under
right.
the
It must
cover.
be like a leper. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point is to keep it going and to be a child. As long as you're a child.
A child. Oh,
yes,
child, yeah.
Because the child within you is the fun, loving, and creative part within all of us.
Right.
Not the adult and the parent. Don't do this.
Yeah.
As long as we have the child within us, we can be loving, creative, and intelligent. And if you get a younger class of students, you can get political science students, socialistic students, history students, to form a think tank and come up with possible solutions.
All right, good. Then it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's well known now within the old paradigm.
No.
Would you be like that? You know, the writers in the established magazines that kind of are within an old, or let's say the president of the United States. They're in an old, or the corporation heads of the big corporations.
Exactly.
They're in a paradigm. They got a certain kind of thing. That's the new thing, and you might be looking for the new paradigm writers and that sort of thing, and they might very well be people that could appear and be appealed to in terms, like we got this fellow Letterman, he writes really critically, this artist guy and everything. There are people who've gotten it together in their own, or Seth Farber. We happen to know Seth Farber writes really well on the, you know, so he's not in the New York Times, but he's got a really important take on mental health and this kind of thing. Those kind of people we could get. He is brilliant. Yeah, there are a lot of people like that.
Letterman is brilliant.
Yeah.
Frank is brilliant.
Yeah.
I wish you would write for us, because I think you're brilliant.
Yeah, maybe we could try to work something.
That would be great.
Yeah, but I mean, because it's a great idea, and it's there to somehow link up, because it's in the spirit again of what Access in its best, access cable television, which is in its best thing, is about, you know. So this kind of thing. And
You've had many great people.
We're all looking for answers and everything, and our leadership, unquote, doesn't seem to be able to have the vision towards something other than reifying or reestablishing the old system or
because
replaying.
it's a stereotype.
Yeah, but that's a traditional thing. I mean, the creative people are usually outside of it, almost akin to the criminal class. Some of the artists were thought of as being criminal class because they're outside the envelope, and creativity questions the established way in which things have been done. So, you know, there'd be a place, and you got a place out for that, right? So, in terms of
I'm trying to keep it going.
And if they had a thing, yeah, and congratulations to you. And say, how many of you are over there now here in New York?
Oh, so we have 60 people.
That's including the distributors.
Vendors. No,
how many on the editorial
vendors.
side? Or
the editorial, thank God, we
side?
have at least 60 people, sir.
60 on the editorial side.
And it's a configuration of people coming from different angles. We even have a writer.
You get a lot of volunteers?
Yes, sir. We have a writer that's in favor of castration. Even though I'm opposed to it, it's there.
Yeah, right,
It's there. Yeah. And he wants castration for people who are who have raped women, and his alternative, and he has other followers saying that castration would be the alternative.
Yeah, well, that would be one thing. You have a wide variety of things like that, but I was thinking more in terms of having the people that are really, I don't know, maybe I'm prejudiced, intellectually have got it together and some sort of an answer, because there might be some answers that our traditional system doesn't present. When you've got David Brinkley telling us we've got enough of everything, you've got George Gilder in the communications field in his telecosm, he keeps saying we're transcending scarcity on all these fronts, and we have all these economic or these political systems which many people can see as being just variations of wage slavery and so forth that we've inherited a way of dealing with, and there's something new needed. And there's a sense of, I saw all the trade representatives. A trade representative in the president's cabinet becomes, or in the president's bailiwick or entourage becomes really important. Barszewski and that kind of thing. They were all talking. They had a thing on C-SPAN, and they were all saying that there is in the world now a general angst that we have these organizing systems, we have these employment rates, inflation rates, the monetary fund, and all these kind of things. We have these kind of things. But there's a general angst. They have a hard time quite understanding why it's there, but it's worldwide. There's something new that's needed. And the established system is something that would be subsumed within a new vision, and that new vision isn't yet being presented by our political or business leadership adequately.
Okay.
And the creative or intellectual leadership hasn't been able to emerge that gives vision to that new thing that's blowing in the wind. Bobby Dylan used to say something's blowing in the wind, it still is, and it isn't enunciated yet.
It's dealing with fantasy island. All you have to do is come out with the truth. And the truth will set you free. But as long as you keep coming up with all of these negative myths and going in a direction which the policy you're doomed to follow, it's like, yes, master, I'll follow your road, and I won't deviate. So if you come out with the truth, if you come out with the real deal, then you can have a positive think tank and come up with positive solutions.
Ultimately, you might be able to come up with something that is going to be, in a certain sense, liberating of the folks, or let's getting everybody housed and so forth, like you say. And that. But some people have done that in a dialectic where in order to present a new pattern, they're going to cut off the heads of the old, like in the French Revolution.
That's true.
But if they come up with the real answer, it would be one that everyone would be able to understand and go along with. That would be the ultimate thing we would go out and search.
And it's a no-no. Yeah. It was done in the Revolution. It was also done with religion.
Got to sign off because we run out of time. So,
Thank
Indio,
you so
your
much.
pleasure to have the perception. Indio, editor-in-chief of the Street News. Didn't get it. Just touched the surface. Happy to invite you to tune in again next week. We're coming back again. Indio, thanks a lot for coming in. All the best to Sam Chen and everyone over there, and all the best to you. And let's see if we can't get more people, buying the paper and getting involved with the activities of the paper. We'll be back again next week. That's it for now. Thank you. So we've got to. So it just goes on and on. So how long would it be before you're going to become a daily?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I was hoping the meeting that the meeting that I had was
you had the meeting just today.
Yes,
April
with some very important business people.
Yeah.
And so now we made a date to meet again in May.
Maybe we could step up the pace a bit.
We're also thinking about